This is Listening with Franklin Livingston, and our guest is Margeaux Appleton.
Margeaux Appleton, an actress, an artist, a New Yorker,
Yes.
also a New Englander. I just made up a term, New Englander. And you're moving to Brooklyn. You live in Manhattan. You
Yes.
go to school.
Yes, I go to Pace University, which is in like Lower Manhattan near Financial District. So I live in Chinatown, which is just a few minutes away at a very lovely fifth-story walk-up.
It was
But yeah.
constructed in the early 19s.
Probably.
Yeah, those buildings don't have elevators.
Yes.
Yeah.
All walk up. The floors are slanted, so things like roll from my room to my roommate's room. But yeah, I'm getting a one-bedroom in Brooklyn. Hopefully soon. I should be, if all things go well, signing the papers today or tomorrow. Yes. Which will be very exciting. Just a new little start, my own space. My last apartment was also got in such a rush as well because school ended and I was like, oh my gosh, I need a place to live. And we kind of just scrambled to find whatever we could. But this time I've actually been able to look and find a place I really like. So good hopes for that.
You were born in New England. No, New London.
Yes, I was born in New London, Connecticut. And
Moved to Massachusetts.
Moved to Massachusetts, like
At
45
the
minutes outside of
2.
Boston at the age of 2.
At the age of 2. Why? You moved or your parents moved?
My parents moved. They moved because my dad got a new job, and they had a bunch of friends in Mystic, but they heard Boston was a good area, and we knew a few people up there. So when my dad got the new job, it was kind of a no-brainer to move, and they wanted to find a more like permanent place. So that's where I was 2 through 18.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I was there the majority of my life.
Yeah. So you embraced your adulthood.
Yes.
Or you made that transition
Yes.
in the state of Massachusetts. Wow. So talk to me about Massachusetts. A lot of people know Mass because of Harvard University and Boston University. And that's it. They think like, oh, maybe everyone is a nerd there. It's like highly intellectual people who were raised there. But people come there from all over the world, right? So what's the difference between that global perspective that Massachusetts is full of nerds or highly intellectual people versus you who grew up there?
Yeah, so I think that is very true. Massachusetts does have very, very high educational standards. Even just going to like high school there, Massachusetts is in the like top of education in general. So it is kind of weird that that's the only stigma because it also has so many other things. I feel like there are really 2 big things people know Massachusetts for, and it's their sports teams or their schools. And that's awesome, but there is so much more than that. Massachusetts is where Salem is, which is a beautiful vacation spot and has a bunch of awesome museums. It's also where a lot of history started, where we learned a lot of that. Massachusetts schools, especially my high school I went to, is very into like the history of the area, but Boston was a really big historical point, so people come for that too, which is really cool. As well as if you go further on the coast, there are all the beaches. And I actually grew up in Ipswich, which is one of the biggest clamming towns in the country. And it's where everyone gets their clams. And you can go to restaurants a lot over the country. I went to a restaurant, I forget where it was, but it was not New England, and they had Ipswich clams, which is the town I grew up in, which was just super fun. I feel like Massachusetts is the starting point for so many things.
Yeah, it was.
And it's a cool place. I enjoyed it, but I think it lost a little bit of the lackluster to me about being the city with so many things because I grew up there. And I grew up outside of the city, so I got very much so like, oh, all those things are super cool, but I grew up in a small town.
It's not that far. Like 45 minutes is not,
Mm-mm.
that far.
It's not that far, but from the way like my town acted, you would think it was like 10 hours away. No one really went
How?
to
In what
Boston
way?
often. It was like everyone in town mostly stayed in town 99% of the time. So, like, unless a parent was working there, like a Boston trip was like a whole, like, oh, we have to plan and take the train and go for the day and plan a whole weekend around going to Boston when it really isn't that far. And my family travels a lot. We drive a lot of road trips in my younger life. And so I kind of got put into perspective of how Boston really isn't far, but growing up very young, like we thought it was like states away almost just because of nobody really went.
And why do you think people might be, was there some sort of hesitation, or it's just like they were not used to of traveling outside the town? It was just not a norm.
I think just not a norm. My town was a big towny town. Like people had families there who had families there who had families there. Like my friend lived in a cul-de-sac with her family, her uncles, like her dad, it was all his side of the family. Her dad's brother lived in the house next door, and then their parents lived in the next house, and
So again,
their
everybody knew
grandparents
everybody.
lived in the next house. It was like one family just bought like a chunk of the town.
Right.
So everyone knows everyone, and we were really big outsiders when we moved in because most people who live there have some sort of family there. Um, More often than not, everyone's like whole family and grandparents are all in Massachusetts, you know?
So for the outsiders, if somebody moved into these communities, how was that? Like, how were they received?
Yeah, I think definitely using my family, uh, from what I've heard from my mom and even just like making friends and stuff, a lot of these people already knew each other.
Mhm.
So when my parents came in and they made great friends, but it took a little bit because everyone's already pretty close.
Mhm.
You know so and they know you're this and that, and everyone like was connected in some way. So being like, oh hi, I'm a new person in this town, everyone's like, but where's your family kind of thing.
Mhm.
So it definitely took a little bit to be adjusted, but honestly, I didn't ever really feel 100% part of that town for that reason. It was a great place to grow up. I loved my house. I adored it. My family home.
What were your challenges after moving there? Although you were two, right? And in that age, you don't know much. Am I an outsider or not?
Mm-hmm.
But you sense, you have feelings, and you have these senses that make you wonder something is different or how others are relating to me. How was that?
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know if I remember quite that age, but when I started getting into school, even just like elementary school, um, it definitely was a little tough because everyone's families knew everyone's families. So a lot of the kids had previously met and hung out. And so going to that school where I, before that, had not met anyone or didn't even know about any of the other like families or anything like that, it was definitely a little odd. I remember like, there would be like big play dates and stuff with a bunch of kids because their moms all knew each other. And I was like, oh, I want that. But I also like didn't understand that it was because they had already formed a community just because they all lived there before and had family there.
And your mom was not welcome that quickly.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
it's just hard. She was welcome when she was then like introduced to it, especially when I started going through school and making friends and being like, oh, can they come over? And at that age, parents normally come with and stuff. So she definitely started to get pretty brought in that way. But when you just enter a new community, especially like my parents were older and working and all of that stuff, and they had a kid, they didn't really know how to like meet people to get that kind of started. So we did a lot like as a family, but we made friends with like, we've had like favorite local restaurants, our favorite pizza place, Riverview Pizza, and we went like once a week when we moved there and became friends with everyone who worked there. And I mean, I just went back a few weeks ago just to say hi to everyone, and they all recognized me, and it's very sweet like to find community in things like that when it's not super easy to always just like find adults to befriend. I feel like being an adult and finding friends is kind of tough when you don't have something kind of pushing you together, like school or college or anything like that. So they were just in a new environment, so it was definitely harder to break into that.
And I'm assuming this neighborhood or town wasn't. There wasn't different. There wasn't any difference between your family and other family in terms of your racial or economic status at that time.
Not really. I mean, there was definitely some variation, especially in economic status, but that didn't really seem like an issue where I grew up. There was very much so no divide between economical like standpoints and classes there. But racially, yes, they fit in very well.
Because I'm trying to understand, what if a family had moved into this town who looked different than they
Yeah.
did? And for them, it might be more challenging.
Yeah, the town was not super diverse, but it also wasn't completely shut off. But it was the majority of the people were Caucasian, so my family did fit in that sense, and did fit the essence of the people. They fit the vibe of the town, and they weren't like people coming from far, far away. They'd always lived kind of in New England. They both grew up in Pittsburgh. So it's not like they're from a completely different area, and they fit in pretty well. It was just, I think, really the how do you go about meeting people in situations like that.
So you mentioned when we spoke first about religious influence, right? Now I'm trying to understand that these people, if a family moves into a neighborhood and they don't know how to fit in or how to make friends, but what about the community that has already been living there? Why weren't they creating opportunities for the new people to come and become part of them? What was their religion? What was the religion? Their religious influence?
Most of the religious influence was definitely Catholic Christian. At least the people I was around, and the part of Massachusetts I grew up in, the town, was definitely on the religious side. Didn't press it, but most of the town was decently religious. And yeah, I also wonder about that in the creating opportunities. And there were things like church, which my mother started to go to, but even in those opportunities, everyone was very close. And it's when there's such a tight-knit group, it's hard to break into it, even if they're standing next to you, you know? Because it's like, how do I intersect this group of people who obviously know each other very, very well and introduce myself as someone new to the environment? So my mom went to church, but I don't think she ever really got right into... She's a very talkative person, and she's very friendly, and she loves to make friends. And she definitely tried to, and she did, but it definitely wasn't as easy as just like, hey, let's be friends. It was definitely like, meeting people through multiple things, reaching out, and making that way.
So, what kind of church was that? Where your mom got plugged into?
Catholic.
That was also
My mother
Catholic.
is Catholic.
And what
Yes.
about your dad?
My dad grew up Catholic Christian and does not practice religion anymore. He supports my mom and attends her religious events when he is able, but he himself doesn't really follow that in a way. I've actually had a lot of conversations with him about religion as I have started to discover and try and figure out where I stand religiously to, just be secure in myself and my beliefs. And he's studied a lot of religions. So after college, he studied like 10 or 15 different religions and read all the religious texts, and just to kind of see what it was
What
about.
everyone believes.
Yeah, see what
Yeah.
everyone believes and see what feels like it fits his beliefs. And I don't know if he's ever actually given me an answer as to if he or what those beliefs would be at the moment, but I know that he supports my mom and has verbalized that, but has also verbalized that that is her thing, and that he stays home. He goes on Christmas when it's really important to her, or important days. But other than that, he doesn't attend church. And I'm not exactly sure where his religious beliefs lie, which
Yeah.
is super cool.
Which is fine. Maybe he's not comfortable sharing them, or maybe he's not there where he could articulate his own belief system,
Yeah.
which I think is totally fine. Something I found interesting, even when we spoke for the first time, you always say Catholic Christian. In the United States, a lot of people think Catholics are different and Christians are different, which is so interesting to me. And it's sometimes you don't have time to talk to everyone. And if your religious identification comes up somehow, I just recall a couple of weeks ago, I was here in the emergency of local hospital. And the room I went into, there was a couple, and the gentleman was in 80s. I just knew that because of some things there. So I talked briefly because they were waiting for 3.5 hours for a CAT scan. So I talked to them, and somehow they mentioned they go to a Catholic church. And they asked me about my religious affiliation. I answered differently than an absolute, I'm a Catholic. But the term Christian, I think, was, for them, it was something else, and they were Catholics. Now, I know that sometimes these church institutions, they don't do a better job in explaining to people that whatever tradition we come from, our belief system or the foundation is what gives us identity. And you could be Christian, you could be Catholic, you could be Christian, you could be a non-denominational, right? You don't need a denomination. Same thing, I know people who might be Christian biblically from the foundational standpoint and might not go to a church in terms of traditional church because either they don't like the system, or they have some scars, or they have been hurt. A lot of people have been hurt by churches. And I remember there's a gentleman who was highly educated. Back in the day, he did PhD from Berkeley, and he's one of the smartest guys in his field. And he left a Protestant denomination years ago, and he once met me, and I sense he had a lot of pain and some sort of resentment. And I asked him why. I didn't ask directly, but I tried to explore with him, and I learned he was going through a rough time in his life, and the church sent him a letter that we are doing this thing, and we need more money. And he took it more of an offense.
Mm.
Uh, his argument was that as a parishioner, as a congregant or member of that particular faith community, the first and utmost job of the leader who probably sent that letter was to check on his congregants and not send a letter and saying that we need money to maybe repair a roof or whatever the churches do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these buildings are very expensive to maintain. So that
Very
means
expensive.
I am just a donor to you, right? And you don't really care about my well being or my life or transition in life, which is true. So I don't know why. I mean, it just came to my mind because of your dad's situation that if he doesn't go, but he supports your mom, uh, I respect that, right?
Yeah, I do as well. I think it's very interesting, and I love having religious conversations with my father. He's an amazing person to talk to and a great conversationalist, and he's so open-minded to what I have to say, and has really helped me in realizing that I don't need to like classify as a religion if I can't find one right this second that I feel like I have my beliefs, which is very different thoughts from my mom. She's very religious, and she grew up very religious, and her family was very religious. So she has a different view on things a little bit when it comes to that. And I think the main reason I say Catholic Christian is because some people do consider it different,
Mm-hmm.
and though I'm not quite sure if that is my truth or anything like that, I don't want to offend anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard in my family and some gatherings that I've been to, just like, oh, it's different. Oh, I'm Catholic, not Christian. So I just like to put both on the table so that,
No, I think in
don't
your sense,
expect
I think that's a great way to deal with it. I like to get into deeper conversations, or I try to also break down different concepts and how things are defined or understood. If I have time, for example, this couple I mentioned in the hospital, they did not have that kind of time. And also, that wasn't the place for me to say, let me explain you guys this. But if you have time and if you have interest, then I think it's okay to do that. That's what I do. It's just because if someone does not know, for whatever reason, the historical truth, the background of these traditions, it's history.
Mm-hmm.
So I think knowing history is better than not knowing and just clinging on to different kinds of informations we have. So a lot of people who are part of an organized religion, which we're talking about, the denominations, I don't know that most of them know how these denominations were formed and why, in the end of the day, we all are Christians or followers of Jesus Christ, or however way you want to put it. I think nowadays people are more using this language. I'm just a follower of Jesus. I don't belong to a formal church. Because the world is more knowledgeable. People have access to more religious texts, as you mentioned, historical texts, say than 100 years ago or 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So when I try to say that if someone wants to belong to or believes that they belong to a faith community that follows Jesus Christ, right, then it's better to claim to be a Christian than having a title which was given to you by your denomination. Because, first of all, mainline church, which was this Roman Catholic, Presbyterian, Methodist, what did I miss here? Baptists, these historical churches in the United States, they are dying. Mostly young people, don't young adults. I would say millennials, Gen Z.
Hmm.
They don't go to church because it's kind of irrelevant to them. You live in the time when a ritual should make sense to you. Even if you ask somebody, why do you have a tattoo? They'll say it means something.
Hmm.
And there was a time in the history when a tattoo was given to people. They did not know why. Only the owner or the guy who was in charge, mostly they were male, he knew why I am putting that mark on someone.
Hmm.
So nowadays, people want to know why.
Yeah, I think people are asking more questions, which is, I think, always a good thing, especially for me. And whatever it is that I believe in, I like answers and I like to know what's going on. And I feel like a lot of people around my age or a little bit older have also had very negative experiences in organized religions for many, many reasons, as have I. I have had some very negative experiences in churches and such. They're just not the most amazing places always, but I definitely think the biggest issue I had or have with organized religions sometimes is that you ask why and they aren't able to give you an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I find very upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I feel like religion is such an important thing for me to discover, because I grew up in a way that was like, well, this is this because Jesus said it was. But why did what prompted him to say that? Why, how did this come about? And it would just be a lot of, oh, just believe. And I'm like, I want to know what I'm believing in. And it's so hard to get answers. It's so hard to get answers. I feel like sometimes I would get answers and it would just be like a stopping point, like answers that would just like hit a wall over and over when I'm just genuinely curious. And that's why I, at least personally, started kind of pulling out of the church environment and the organized religion, because I found myself having so many unanswered questions. And I just personally don't like following anything blindly. I don't do anything or go into anything blindly. I always think about it. I like to know the history behind it. I like to know what's going on, what impacts it might have, just because I think that's really important. And for me, I really like to know why I'm doing everything I'm doing, because I find it so fascinating. But I really found myself being persuaded to blindly follow something that has a lot of structure to it. It wasn't just like blindly following a big idea. It's blindly following, you believe this and you believe that, and you don't believe this, and this is a sin, 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 and like all this stuff. And then when you ask why, you're like, oh, well, it says it in the Bible. Okay, let's go back to the Bible. Why, where, how? Like, explain this to me.
Or at least tell me what does sin mean.
What it really means. And they're like, oh, it's, well, when you do something bad. Okay, what is considered bad? You know, they're like, well, whatever is, like, it says in the Bible, but I feel like people, I'm going and using the Bible mostly because that's the religious text that I grew up looking at and the one I would know the best. But there are a lot of things in the Bible that people do follow today, and there are a lot of things in the Bible people don't. And I'm not gonna quote any of them because I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to mess up any important text, but there are a lot of things that are considered sins that are in our everyday life. But still, religious groups and churches use some of those things almost as a tactic to make themselves feel better about not changing with the times. I feel is a big thing, and also make themselves feel better about not understanding other people's views. It's like, okay, well,
or using the text just to benefit themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Or selecting the part they want to say is relevant to us. As an example. So
Absolutely.
this came to my mind because, I've been watching a lot of news these days for the past few days.
Yes.
So, conservative Christian women in the United States, right?
Mm.
People who would say I live by the Bible and Bible is the supreme text in my life, uh, or like they take it as a literal truth. These kind of language they would use. I don't see. I can say 100% women on the television channels, news channels. I did not see a single woman covering her head during a prayer, right? Whereas it's written in the Bible that women should cover their head. This is an example. I don't see them talking about that. I don't see them claiming it's important or not. And I don't know if you'll ask that question to them that, okay, you make a big fuss about another topic. The same topic is addressed by the same apostle who wrote the same letter to the same local church. Whether I don't know where it is in the Bible. Actually, let me pull it up because I don't want to mess up the verse. So
yeah, I always just like to play it on the safe side of if I'm talking about religious text specifically or pulling any direct facts, that I'm very clear on that. I never want to offend anybody because I do think if you believe in something, you should absolutely believe in it.
1 Corinthians 11:6. It says, "For if a woman does not cover her head, she might as well have her hair cut off. But if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaven, then she should cover her head." It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Right? And I think he's talking about women in leadership role in particular, because there was a verse that a woman who prophesies, which is a leadership role, should not have a shaven head, right? So if the Apostle Paul is talking to the church at Corinth, he's talking about a lot more stuff in that, in the whole book. And why do we only take few things and say, we got to do that? Because the Bible says so. And this is also in the Bible. I don't see them doing that. Even the conservative news channels, people would wear a sign of cross, or they'll say, oh my God, I'm really Christian, and these are not good Christians. But I don't see them dressing up like this.
Yeah, I feel like there's a big issue with picking and choosing, for lack of any better term. But I do see it a lot when it comes to religion, and I really think it comes down to resistance to change. And that I think slowly things in the Bible started changing with the times. Like, the reason why we don't do a lot of those things is because they were changed before us, and people stopped doing them because they decided it was no longer important. Yet we still revert back to the original text for some certain things. And I think that some people can't admit they are incorrect sometimes.
Always. I mean, as human beings, it's not easy.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
But I feel like someone's like, if they're like, oh, I'm religious, and someone says, oh, then what are your views on X, Y, or Z? They feel like they're like, oh, I gotta, show how religious I am. I believe in this because why would we change it? And I think there's just such a large percentage of people who feel that way. But I think that it's important to change, and everything is changing around us all the time. And especially when it comes to religion, I feel like they are the people who are the most resistant to change. people who are in very strict religions or hold themselves to a very religious standard, they are very hesitant to change because they're comfortable, and they like to use religion as an answer. And if religion can change, then it can't be used as a very sturdy baseline. So I do understand that, but it is really hard to wrap my head around.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the things you mentioned earlier is the role of education, history, logic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is an unfortunate reality. A lot of churches I've visited, their homilies or their sermons are very shallow, and it doesn't really connect or answer a lot of questions I would have in my mind. Right? You can't have answer to everything. I understand that medical science does not have answers to everything. Physics does not have answers to everything.
Mm-hmm.
So as chemistry and other subjects. But still, it's not that you don't have 50% answers in these fields.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to the organized, institutionalized churches, uh, I think that's the case. So sometimes you walk into church, the homily is just making you feel good about whatever, and you don't need that. You can watch YouTube and get better stuff than that. Why do you need someone who went through this whole trainings and order and then became someone who wears those vestments or not? I mean, every church does not.
Mm-hmm.
But the logic behind, so if we're talking about women covering their head, why is that important when he's writing that? Whom is he writing to? What were the circumstances? And then why is he using these terms, shaven head? And why is he saying if somebody's doing a particular kind of job, a role, she should not be in that condition?
Yeah.
So the logic is missing a lot of times. And I don't think I
most of the
agree with
time.
you that this is not the time when you say you got to do it because it's written. Right?
Yeah, it's just kind of like there's a lot of stuff that is written that does not make it all accurate because the world changes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's technology that makes a lot of ancient texts irrelevant in some ways because we have new information, new technology, new ways of doing things, new products, new everything, and that's what happens in the world. So much from the past is irrelevant as the times change, and if you want to keep something truly relevant, it needs to be able to morph with the times.
And going back to the Apostle Paul,
Mm-hmm.
so he's writing about different issues when he's talking to the people in Corinth. He's talking about different issues when he's talking to people at Thessalonica,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think these Thessalonians were the people who didn't like to work. So the issues in those communities were not addressed with the same, syllabus. And then there's Ephesus. Now, that's what makes it more interesting is that the biblical text itself addresses different communities differently. Mm-hmm. Whereas today, what happens is we try to take a verse or a passage and then just tell the whole north and south and east and west. This is the way it should be, or it's got to be because it's written that way.
Yes, which I think is just a flawed mindset, because also I think something with religious texts is you go back so far, who had the credentials to write this? How did this all come to be? And like you said, the circumstances in every situation, I feel like every verse is very specific to a group or community, not everyone. So it's like when you try and spread that upon everyone, you're going to have problems because it wasn't meant for everyone in the first place.
Yeah, and the same thing you see in the Gospels. But one thing I'm gonna encourage us to think about is the principles, the essence, and apart from all these social rules, I'm calling it, because there was another challenge in the Apostle Paul's era. The church became the state's religion, or Christianity became the state's religion somewhere around third century or after that. Before that, Christians were the most poor, the most marginalized, looked down, and persecuted people. So these people who were living in these communities, first of all, they were very connected. Connected to the point they were sharing their meals every day, right? Why? Because when you share your meal, again, logic. Why did they share a meal every day? Because that was the time they were able to check in with each other.
Yes, and they form community. Food.
Yeah.
Food always has and always will be a great way to form a community.
Definitely. And these people did not have social media or, hey, let me send you text or call you. So that was their way. And there was fear involved. There was risk involved of getting killed by the state, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So they were under the leadership of the Apostle Paul, who was writing them, because he used to hear this is their problem, now how to deal with it. And they were fighting, or they had a battle against the wider society. But the principles were more rooted in the divine intervention and moral principles. Moral, when I use term moral, how to be a better human being.
Yes.
And these were basic things that we all learn and talk about, and I will eventually get to that. How was your upbringing? But usually we are taught not to be greedy, not to be a bully, not to take more than you need, or then when you grow older, not to be a man whore or a player, or for the lack of a better phrase, I didn't have a better phrase there. So the apostle was talking about the same things. And don't ruin it. But it gets out of the context when we don't understand what was happening in Corinth and why it was necessary, or what was happening in Ephesus. And a lot of people just use that passage. They'll tell you a story. They'll connect the story with them. And nowadays, young adults, unless they have a kid and they need that kid to be baptized or get his or her christening done, they don't want to go to a church because it's irrelevant, the term you use.
Yes.
And why do I have to sing those hymns? I don't even know how to sing. A lot of people don't. Or why do I have to sit for an hour and a half or an hour, depending where, and keep listening to a lot of stuff that's so out of my lingo? Especially if it's a liturgy, a lot of things people don't understand because they are never taught. That works with people who come from a particular background and are familiar with those concepts, right?